Water hit my windshield so hard the wipers couldn't clear it, but I didn't care. My sister's voice on the voicemail was barely a whisper over the thunder. He locked me out. Her husband, Greg, thought he was untouchable behind his deadbolts. He forgot what I do for a living. The rain that Tuesday night wasn't just falling. It was driving sideways, slamming against the siding of my apartment like handfuls of gravel. I had been out of the service for exactly 8 months. The transition back to civilian life had been quiet, mostly consisting of early morning runs, drinking bad coffee black, and trying to figure out how to talk to people who worried about mortgage rates instead of mortar fire. I was sitting on my living room floor, relacing a pair of heavy leather boots out of sheer muscle memory, when my phone vibrated on the coffee table. The screen read, "Lily." I glanced at the clock on the microwave. It was 10:45 p.m. Lily never called me this late. In fact, Lily rarely called me at all anymore, unless it was a scheduled 15-minute check-in on a Sunday afternoon. Her husband, Greg, didn't like her spending too much time on the phone. "It disrupts the evening wind-down," she had told me once, her voice tight, parroting a phrase that sounded exactly like something from one of his corporate wellness seminars. Greg was a senior director of something vague at a tech firm. He wore tailored slacks, checked his sleep cycles on a $500 smartwatch, and liked his house kept at exactly 68 degrees. I hit accept. "Lil, you okay?" All I heard was wind, a heavy, rushing sound, followed by a sharp, ragged intake of breath. "Jess?" Her voice was shaking so violently the syllables broke apart. "Jess, I'm so cold." The relaxed posture of a civilian left my body in a fraction of a second. The shift was absolute. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave, flattening out. "I'm outside, on the porch." I could hear her teeth clicking together over the receiver. It was 42 degrees outside, with a driving, freezing rain. "Go back inside, Lily. Why are you on the porch?" "I can't." A sob tore out of her, thin and pathetic, and it made my stomach twist into a hard knot. He locked the door. I just stepped out to grab the food delivery off the mat. He shut the door behind me. I heard the deadbolt. "Do you have your keys?" "My purse is inside." My phone was in my sweater pocket. "Jess, I'm in my socks. The porch is flooding." I closed my eyes for exactly 2 seconds. The history of Lily and Greg played behind my eyelids like a bad security tape. Greg didn't hit her. If he had hit her, I would have put him in a trauma ward years ago. Instead, Greg used 1,000 tiny cuts. He controlled the finances. He isolated her from our parents. He belittled her in public with a condescending smile. At Thanksgiving, he had taken her plate away before she was finished, laughing to the table. "She doesn't need those extra carbs. Right, babe?" I had gripped my fork so hard my knuckles popped, but Lily had shot me a look of pure terror, begging me with her eyes to stay silent. As a soldier, you are trained to identify threats. You look for the absence of normal and the presence of abnormal. Greg's entire existence was a flashing red light. He was a bully who hid behind an expensive zip code and a 6-figure salary, convinced that because his violence left no bruises, it wasn't violence at all. "Did you knock?" I asked, standing up and reaching for my keys. I knocked for 20 minutes. He turned the living room lights off. "He's ignoring me, Jess." He was mad because the restaurant forgot the extra dressing he asked for. He said it was my fault for not checking the bag. "I'm 10 minutes away," I said. "Get off the front porch. The wind is hitting it directly. Go to the side of the garage. Squeeze behind the recycling bins. It'll break the wind chill. Do not hang up." "Okay," she whimpered. I heard the wet slapping of her stockinged feet on the concrete. I grabbed my heavy canvas jacket, a waterproof tactical flashlight, and my truck keys. I didn't bother with an umbrella. You don't bring an umbrella to a breach. The drive across town was a blur of slick asphalt and glaring streetlights bleeding through the rain. I drove my beat-up F-150 with a cold, mechanical precision. My mind wasn't clouded by rage. It was crystal clear. Anger is a liability. Focus is a weapon. Greg lived in a gated subdivision called Oak Creek, where the driveways were stamped concrete and the lawns were meticulously manicured. There was no guard at the gate tonight, just an automated heavy iron barrier. I pulled up to the keypad. I didn't have a code. I looked at the heavy metal arm blocking the road, calculated the clearance, and threw the truck in reverse. I backed up 20 yards, shifted into drive, and gunned it. I didn't hit the gate. I didn't need to. I hopped the curb, tearing deep, muddy trenches through the pristine landscaping of the neighborhood entrance, bouncing heavily over the sidewalk, and bypassing the gate entirely. I felt the satisfying crunch of decorative mulch under my tires before the truck slammed back onto the asphalt of the subdivision. I navigated the winding, dimly lit streets until I saw his house. It was a sprawling two-story colonial. The lights downstairs were dark, save for the faint, flickering blue glow of a television in the back living room. He was awake. He was watching TV while his wife was freezing to death outside. I cut the headlights before I pulled into the driveway. I didn't want him to know I was here. Not yet. I slammed the truck into park and stepped out into the deluge. The rain was freezing, instantly soaking through my jeans, but I barely registered the temperature. I clicked on my heavy maglite, keeping the beam aimed at the ground, and moved quickly up the driveway toward the side of the garage. Lily. I kept my voice low. Here. A small voice croaked. I swung the beam. She was wedged between the brick wall and a heavy plastic trash bin, her knees pulled tight to her chest. She was wearing a thin, beige cotton cardigan and pajama pants. Her socks were plastered to her feet, black with mud, but it was her face that stopped me in my tracks. Lily's lips were a bruised, pale blue. Her skin was gray, and she was shivering so violently that she couldn't keep her head still. Early-stage hypothermia. I didn't say a word. I stripped off my heavy canvas jacket, the interior still holding my body heat, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She was stiff, her muscles locked in a desperate attempt to generate warmth. I wrapped my arm around her waist and hauled her to her feet. She leaned all her weight against me, her teeth chattering loudly. "I've got you," I said softly, guiding her toward the truck. "Watch your step." I opened the passenger door, lifted her onto the seat, and slammed the door shut against the storm. I leaned in through the driver's side, turned the engine over, and blasted the heat to maximum. "Jess," she stammered, her hands gripping the edges of my oversized jacket. Don't make him mad. He'll just take it out on me tomorrow." I looked at my older sister. I remembered how she used to be before Greg. She used to laugh with her head thrown back. She used to paint large, messy canvases in the garage. Now, she was a hollowed-out shell of a woman, terrified of a man who threw tantrums over salad dressing. "He's not going to say a word to you tomorrow," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Stay in the truck, lock the doors." "What are you doing?" Her eyes went wide with panic. "Having a conversation." I shut the driver's door. The heavy thud isolated her inside the warm cab. I stood in the driveway for a moment, letting the rain plaster my hair to my forehead. I stared at the solid oak front door of Greg's house. I walked up the front steps. The porch was covered, but the wind was still whipping the rain across the welcome mat. The mat said the Millers in elegant, looping script. I hit the doorbell. I could hear it chime deep inside the house, a two-tone, pleasant melody. I waited 10 seconds. Nothing. I hit it again, holding the button down for 5 seconds. Still nothing. I balled my right hand into a fist and began hammering on the heavy wood of the door. I didn't knock like a polite neighbor. I struck it with the heavy, rhythmic pounding of a military police raid. The sound echoed over the thunder. Bang, 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 bang. A light flicked on in the foyer. Through the frosted glass sidelights flanking the door, I saw a distorted shadow moving toward me. The lock clicked. The heavy wooden door pulled inward, but only a few inches. The chain guard was still engaged. Greg peered through the crack. He was wearing silk pajama pants and a cashmere sweater. He had a glass of scotch in one hand. The smell of cedarwood and expensive cologne drifted out of the warm house, colliding with the smell of wet asphalt. He saw me, and his expression shifted from annoyance to arrogant amusement. "Jess," he sighed, taking a sip of his scotch. "It's late. What are you doing here?" "Open the door, Greg." "Lily needs a timeout," he said, rolling his eyes as if we were discussing a misbehaving toddler. "She's been completely erratic lately. It's exhausting. I'm just letting her cool off. She can come back in when she's ready to apologize." "She was out here for an hour in near-freezing rain," I said, the volume of my voice never rising. "Her lips are blue." "Oh, she's being dramatic," he scoffed. "There's a patio heater in the back if she really wanted to use it. Now, good night, Jess. I have an early meeting." He tried to push the door shut. My combat boot shot out, the steel-reinforced toe catching the bottom edge of the heavy door. The impact stopped the door dead in its tracks. The vibration shuddered all the way up the wooden frame. Greg stumbled back a half step, his scotch sloshing over the rim of his glass onto his wrist. He glared at me through the crack. "Remove your foot, Jessica," he snapped, his voice adopting that familiar, authoritative tone he used to belittle service workers and his wife. "Or I'm calling the police. You are trespassing on my property." He was looking at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered onto his lawn. He was banking on the social contract. He believed the rules of civilized society, the locks, the gates, the polite boundaries protected him. He thought that because he owned the house and paid the taxes, he was the king of the castle. He had completely forgotten that a lock only works if the person on the outside agrees to respect it. "Call them," I said. I pulled my boot back. Greg let out a smug little breath and moved to close the door. Before the latch could click, I pivoted my hips, planted my left foot, and drove the flat of my right boot squarely into the space just below the deadbolt. The sound of the breach was deafening. The heavy oak didn't just open, it exploded inward. The brass chain guard ripped out of the wooden frame with a high-pitched metallic shriek. The deadbolt tore through the strike plate, sending a shower of wood splinters raining down onto the expensive tile of the foyer. The door slammed into the interior wall with the force of a bomb blast, the doorknob punching a perfect, fist-sized hole through the drywall. Greg shrieked a high, undignified sound. He scrambled backward, losing his footing on the slick tile and falling hard onto his backside. The glass of scotch shattered across the floor. I stepped over the threshold, bringing the storm inside with me. Water poured off my clothes, puddling instantly on the floor. I stood in his brightly lit foyer, looking down at him. The man who controlled everything was suddenly sitting in a puddle of expensive liquor and shattered glass, his eyes wide with a primal, suffocating terror. "You," he stammered, scrambling back until his shoulders hit the baseboard of his curved staircase. "You're insane. I'm pressing charges. I'm having you locked up." I didn't yell. I didn't posture. I walked slowly over to him, the heavy rubber soles of my boots crunching over the broken glass, until I was standing directly above him. "Where is her purse?" I asked quietly. Greg stared up at me, his chest heaving under the expensive cashmere. The bravado he carried to country club dinners and board meetings had evaporated, leaving only a pale, trembling man sitting in a puddle. "I asked you a question, Greg," I said, my voice steady, betraying zero emotion. "Where is her purse?" He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He pointed a shaking finger toward the kitchen. On the island." I stepped past him. I didn't rush. The kitchen was pristine, a sprawling expanse of white quartz and stainless steel that looked like it had never actually been used to cook a meal. Lily's purse, a worn brown leather tote that she'd had since college, sat near a bowl of fake lemons. I grabbed the straps and slung it over my shoulder. Then, I bypassed the front door and headed for the main staircase. "Hey!" Greg's voice cracked as he finally scrambled to his feet, slipping slightly on the wet tile. He leaned against the wall, trying to summon back the authority he used to terrify his wife. "Where do you think you're going? You can't just walk through my house." I didn't pause on the carpeted stairs. "I'm packing her a bag." "She's my wife! She lives here!" he yelled, taking a step toward the stairs but stopping at the bottom step. I reached the master bedroom. It looked like a luxury hotel suite, impersonal, cold, perfectly staged. I went straight to Lily's side of the walk-in closet. I pulled a canvas weekender bag from the top shelf and began stripping hangers, sweaters, jeans, underwear, socks. I moved to her vanity and swept her toothbrush, contact lenses, and prescription bottles into the side pocket. Next was the small fireproof safe tucked under the built-in shelving. Lily had told me the code 2 years ago during a rare moment of vulnerability, the 4th of November, 2018. Their wedding anniversary. I punched it in, pulled the heavy steel door open, and extracted her passport, her birth certificate, and the small velvet box containing the jewelry our grandmother left her. I zipped everything into the duffel. When I turned around, Greg was standing in the bedroom doorway. He had grabbed a heavy bronze bookend from the downstairs study and was holding it in his right hand, the knuckles white. He was trying to look imposing, but his breathing was shallow and erratic. "Put the bag down, Jessica," he said. His voice was lower now, a manufactured gravel meant to intimidate. "I'm calling the police." I'm going to tell them a deranged veteran broke into my house, destroyed my property, and tried to rob me. I walked toward him. I didn't slow down. I didn't drop my hands to a defensive posture. I just kept walking, my eyes locked on his. "Stop right there," he warned, raising the heavy bronze bookend. He telegraphed the swing a mile away. As he brought the makeshift weapon down, I simply stepped inside the arc of his arm. I clamped my left hand over his right wrist, my thumb digging hard into the median nerve, and pivoted my hips. I used his own downward momentum against him, snapping his arm down and twisting his wrist sharply outward. The bookend hit the thick carpet with a dull thud. Greg let out a sharp cry of pain, his knees buckling as the joint lock forced him downward. I didn't strike him. I just held him there, bent in half, hovering inches above the floor, fully immobilized by the pressure on his joints. "Listen to me very carefully," I whispered, leaning down so my voice was right next to his ear. "If you call the police, I will wait right here with you. When they arrive, I will show them the splintered wood where you locked your wife out in a freezing storm. I will have the EMTs take her core temperature, documenting the early stages of hypothermia. I will give them my statement. And then, tomorrow morning, I will call your firm's HR department, your board of directors, and every single partner at your company, and I will read them the police report." He let out a pathetic whimper as I shifted my grip, adding a fraction of an inch of pressure to the wrist lock. "Your entire life is built on what people think of you, Greg," I continued quietly. "You are terrified of being embarrassed. If you make this a legal matter, I promise you, I will make it public. You will be the man who tortured his wife over a salad dressing. Do you understand me?" "Yes," he gasped, his forehead resting on the carpet. "Yes, let go. Do not contact her. Do not come near my apartment. You will hear from a lawyer." I released his wrist. He collapsed onto the floor, clutching his arm to his chest, gasping for air. I picked up the heavy duffel bag, adjusted Lily's purse on my shoulder, and walked out of the bedroom. I didn't look back as I descended the stairs, stepped over the ruined front door, and walked back out into the freezing rain. The interior of the F-150 felt like a furnace when I yanked the passenger door open. Lily was curled tightly into a ball on the seat, my canvas jacket pulled completely over her head. The truck's cabin was vibrating with the force of the heater, but she was still shivering so hard her teeth rattled. I threw the bags into the back seat and climbed behind the wheel. I didn't put the truck in gear. Instead, I turned on the dome light and turned toward her. "Lily, look at me." She lowered the collar of the jacket. Her skin was still frighteningly pale, her lips lacking any pink. My military medical training kicked in, overriding any residual adrenaline from the house. First rule of cold weather casualties: remove the wet source. You cannot warm up a body that is encased in freezing water. "Take the clothes off," I commanded, my tone shifting into the clinical, authoritative voice of a field medic. She blinked, confused and sluggish. "What?" "Your clothes are soaked. They are leaching the heat out of your core. Take them off right now." I reached into the back seat, unzipped her duffel bag, and pulled out a heavy fleece sweater and a pair of dry sweatpants. Her hands were shaking too badly to manage the buttons of her cardigan. She fumbled with them, her fingers stiff and uncoordinated. I batted her hands away gently and unbuttoned the wet fabric myself, pulling the soaked cotton off her shoulders. I helped her strip off the muddy, freezing pajama pants and the sodden socks. Her skin was ice cold to the touch. I immediately handed her the dry fleece and the sweatpants. She pulled them on clumsily. "Drink this," I said, unscrewing the cap of the thermal flask I kept in my center console. It was just lukewarm water, but it was warmer than her internal temperature. Small sips. She took a sip, her hands wrapped around the metal flask, my heavy canvas jacket draped over her lap as a blanket. I reached over, adjusted the vents so the hot air was blasting directly onto her chest and feet, and finally shifted the truck into drive. The drive back to my apartment was silent, save for the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers and the roaring of the heater. I kept my eyes on the road, periodically glancing over to check her status. Her violent shivering was beginning to slow down into a steady tremor, a good sign. It meant her body was finally generating enough heat to stabilize. "Jess," she murmured about 10 minutes into the drive. Her voice was raspy, exhausted. "Yeah." "The door. What was that noise?" "I had to force entry," I said flatly. "The lock broke." She stared out the passenger window at the blurry streetlights. He's going to be so angry tomorrow. He's not, I replied, merging onto the highway. He's terrified. Bullies always are when they realize their victim has backup. He's going to spend tomorrow fixing his front door and hoping nobody saw it happen. She fell silent again. The tension in her shoulders slowly began to uncoil as the reality of the situation settled in. She wasn't going back. The cycle of walking on eggshells, the constant monitoring of Greg's moods, the isolation it had been shattered as completely as the oak frame of that front door. We pulled into my apartment complex. The rain had finally began to taper off into a steady, miserable drizzle. I grabbed the bags from the back, helped Lily out of the cab, and guided her up the exterior metal stairs to my second-floor unit. Inside, my apartment was exactly as I had left it. Quiet, orderly. The half-laced boot was still sitting on the floor. It felt like a different universe from the sprawling, hostile mansion we had just left. I directed her to the bathroom. Take a shower. Turn the water up as hot as you can stand it until the chill is completely out of your bones. I'm going to make tea. She nodded dumbly and closed the bathroom door. A moment later, I heard the pipes groan as the hot water engaged. I went to the kitchen, put the kettle on the stove, and unpacked her medication and toiletries onto the counter. I pulled out my phone and sent a brief, encrypted text to a friend of mine who had served as a JAG officer and now ran a private family law practice in the city. Need a consultation for my sister. High-asset divorce, domestic abuse, intimidation. I have all her documents. Call me tomorrow. The kettle began to whistle. I poured 2 mugs of chamomile tea, set them on the small dining table, and sat down. 20 minutes later, Lily emerged. Her hair was wrapped in a towel, and the color had finally returned to her face. Her cheeks were flushed pink from the heat of the shower. She looked exhausted, but the hollow, terrified look in her eyes had receded. She pulled out a chair and sat across from me, wrapping both hands tightly around the warm mug. We sat in silence for a long time. The sound of the rain tapping lightly against the kitchen window was the only noise in the room. It was no longer a threat. It was just weather. I don't know what to do now, she finally whispered, staring down at the dark liquid in her cup. You don't have to know right now, I said, taking a sip of my own tea. Tonight, you sleep. Tomorrow, we call a lawyer. The day after that, we figure out the rest. She looked up at me. For the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of my older sister, the woman who used to paint, the woman who used to laugh. He locked the door, Jess, she said, her voice trembling. Not from the cold, but from the sheer weight of the realization. I could have died out there, and he was just watching TV. I know. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against my knuckles. Thank you for remembering how to break things. I looked at my hands, calloused and scarred from years of doing exactly that, and then looked back at her. Thank you for calling me so I knew what needed breaking. Outside, the storm finally broke, and the sky began to lighten with the heavy, gray promise of dawn. The war wasn't over, but the extraction was complete. We were off the battlefield, and for the first time in a long time, the enemy was the one on the run. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this intense, grounded journey of survival, sisterhood, and facing down the bullies hiding behind closed doors, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a strong, unyielding protagonist, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our upcoming dramatic audio stories. See you in the next one.